Hey there everybody, it's markcrilley. I'm back with another video. Sorry I wasn't able to do one last week. I was finishing up my rough draft of my latest graphic novel. Happy to say that I'm finally done with the rough draft, which hopefully means I can do some nicer videos for you in this little interim that I'm going to have between the finishing of the rough draft and beginning to finalize those pages. But today I am doing a little tribute to Monet. And continuing what I called my Learning from the Masters series. And what I'm doing here is a kind of a copy in watercolor of one of his great paintings of Rouen Cathedral in Rouen, France. I think it's like an hour's drive from Paris. Of course, it's not by coincidence that I'm doing this. We all saw the horrific images of Notre Dame in flames this past week, and I thought this might be a nice way, even though it isn't Notre Dame, it's a different cathedral, but it might be nice to pay tribute to the people of France, their resiliency, and all the great culture that they have given to the world by way of doing a little study here of this painting. Now, if you wanted to learn oil painting techniques, you would, of course, try to do a copy of it in oil. And sometimes if you go to a museum, if the museum allows people to do that, you'll see people doing faithful copies of oil paintings in oil at the actual size of the original painting, right there in the gallery, which is ideally where you want to be. I was going to say that, I've got here a printout of an image that I found on the internet. And of course you're getting into dicey territory in terms of the color, right? Because the original photograph that you took off the internet is probably not the true color of the painting. And then you print it out, which I did, and then that gets you even farther away from the original color. And with Monet, it really is all about the color. So people might be saying, "Crilley, you idiot, what are you even learning here? You're learning nothing because you are doing this highly inaccurate color study." Well, true enough, guilty as charged. But I can't get to the, I think it's the Musée d'Orsay, is that correct, in Paris. And I can't stand in front of the original painting as I do this YouTube video, so I'm doing the next best thing. If you are looking for an accurate representation of the color, looking on the internet, I would say the best you can do is this is what I did, is I searched for not just the painting, but I searched for the painting hanging in the museum, so that, you get an image of it with the frame around it. And I feel like those photos are maybe more likely to just be a fairly accurate photo of the person, just some tourist in the museum taking a snapshot and then not tweaking those colors. I found that a lot of the original images were looked as if they had been greatly played around with in terms of, I've seen images of this very, very yellow looking. Of course, Monet did like 20 different versions of this same image of the Rouen Cathedral facade, and apparently he would have multiple paintings going simultaneously, so that as the light changed from morning to late morning to early afternoon or whatever, he would switch to another painting that he had begun at that time of day. But anyway, let me talk a little bit about what I'm doing here. I always like to work from light to dark, especially when I'm doing watercolor. So I'm putting down just a very light base layer of watercolor, trying to get this kind of pale peachy color that I see deep underneath some parts of the painting. And I'm planning to cover over a lot of this with white gouache, my opaque white paint, my beloved white gouache, at the end. But I thought if I get some of this sort of, like I said, peachy color down to begin with, that will allow for contrast when I apply the white gouache later on, and those little flecks of white will really pop. So I'm going to be using loads and loads of time-lapse. Doff your cap, old man time-lapse. I'm the real hero of these videos. It's true, especially with this one. I'm not going to attempt to do real time as I reproduce this insanely detailed painting. Rather, I am going to just sort of check in with you guys every once in a while as I proceed and make progress on it, and sort of tell you some of the things that I'm learning, because that's the whole idea of this Learning from the Masters series is I'm going to learn a little from Monet today, and I'm going to tell you the things that I'm learning as I go, and hopefully I inspire some of you to do studies like this. So let's go ahead and kick it into time-lapse, and I'm going to, little by little, start to refine, probably add the blues. You see there's a lot of blues here. I'm going to probably switch to that, and then come back and have some more words in just a moment. Alright, so I thought I'd just jump back in here and say a thing or two about what I'm learning as I study the painting. And of course, the Impressionists were famous for adding color to shadows. Instead of having it just be black, they would get purples and blues. And here you can see, I haven't gotten to it yet, but there's kind of like an orangey color in there that I may start to add colored pencils in a minute to try to get some of these colors more accurate. But, you know, in general, I would say that what Monet is teaching me is that you can loosen up as an artist. You know, you don't have to be so obsessed with capturing every single detail. I mean, depending on what your style is. If you're into photorealism, then of course that's part of your job, I suppose. But I'm enjoying the freedom of not having to be so completely accurate with everything that I'm catching, and just sort of dropping in, well, Impressionism, your impression, that's what it was all about, right? And for me, it's very liberating to loosen up a little and not feel like, oh boy, am I getting this absolutely right? Well, no, that's not what it's all about. You know, get in the ballpark of it, and it's surprising how good it can still look. And that's the whole idea of doing these studies, is that you are learning, you're getting out of your comfort zone, you're working in a different way, you're unlocking the secrets of how they did it, and perhaps just as important as all of that, you're seeing this painting much more carefully than you ever could if you just stood in front of it. When you try to reproduce it, just by the nature of what you're doing, you are studying every single square inch of that painting in a very careful way. And that's just good for you as an artist. And I was going to say that, you know, we associate this type of painting with people who are serious about doing classical artwork, but the truth is, when you see, let's say, front cover art for comic books, you can tell the people who've studied this stuff, and even if the entire image was done digitally, even if it's, you know, it's a picture of Spider-Man swinging over Manhattan or something like that, you can see the purple in the shadows, you can see sometimes the impressionistic quality, and you can tell the people who have studied the masters, and it lifts their art to a higher level, I think. So there is a benefit to doing this type of study, no matter what style you're working in, whether it's a manga style or even a super cartoony style. I think you could gain something from doing these types of studies. And in general, I think, learning from artists that don't necessarily do a style that's exactly what you normally do. Like I said, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, you'd be surprised what you can learn and how it will come back and inform your own work and just make your work a little more rich than if you only learned from one source. I guess I'll do just a tiny bit of real time as I try to bring in a bit of this golden ochre color that I'm seeing at the bottom of the painting. Again, I fear that my source painting here is not accurate to what you would see if you were standing in the museum. Still, there is certainly some kind of yellow-orangey tint going on there. And so that will be my next phase as I shift from the purples and blues to trying to get some of this orange. So let's go ahead and do this in time-lapse, and I'll be back with a few more words as I get closer to the final details. Alright, so you can see how I added in bits of orange into the shadows, which really is kind of an interesting effect. You wouldn't think of adding orange to shadows normally. And yeah, we can learn so much from folks like Monet, who innovated all this stuff more than a century ago. I'm pulling out the colored pencils now to refine things. I've been doing this pretty much all my life, at least since my early 20s. Starting with a layer of watercolor and then coming in with colored pencil to sort of tighten things up and just get an extra type of color into the illustration. Now, I wouldn't say that you're going to see so many of the old masters blending watercolor and colored pencil, but certainly modern children's book illustrators will routinely mix together colored pencil with watercolor, and I think they work very nicely together. The watercolor gives you this sort of seamless area of color that is by its nature not super precise. And then the colored pencils are so good at tightening things up, whereas without the watercolor, the colored pencil would produce a kind of a grainy area of color. So, all right, I'm going to try to keep moving because I fear that this video is already getting a little long. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of this sort of tightening, colored pencil tightening process in time-lapse, but then I'm going to be back to do what I hope will be one of the most interesting parts of the video, and that is the white gouache, that opaque white paint, which is really going to hopefully make this look even more like a real Impressionist painting. All right, well, I spent probably about an hour since the last time that I spoke on this video, very gradually building up these colors, and that is the major thing that I'm learning here, is that, if you take your time, if you slow down, give yourself extra time, and start mixing together these subtle variations of colors, you will be rewarded with this very rich combination of colors. And this, definitely is maybe the biggest lesson that I've learned from this. Next time I want to do a full color piece, instead of just, dropping one color into a shadow or whatever, I'm really going to try mixing it up as Monet did. And yeah, it's just, it takes time. It's not going to happen immediately, but by mixing together all those different colors, you get this marvelous effect. And I would never have arrived at this just on my own. I don't think it's by doing this study. So now it is time for me to bring out my beloved white gouache, this opaque white paint. And give me a second, I'm going to make sure I get the right consistency. A couple of drops of water in there to start mixing it and making it a little thinner. And then I go right into the painting with these little drops of white. Now I think, I've done this entire thing with the camera pretty far back. I think it would benefit you to see this a little more close up. So give me a moment, I'm going to refocus the camera. All right, so hopefully this is still in focus. I didn't want to get too tight and have the whole thing end up out of focus, but I'm taking this white gouache and, you know, wherever I see the brighter whites in the original illustration, oil painting. I'm the guy doing an illustration, not Monet. I'm going in and adding little drops. And the nice thing about this is this is the closest maybe to imitating oil paint out of all the different media that I've used today. Opaque white gouache really does sort of fairly successfully imitate the look of white oil paint. And I suppose you could do this entire thing using acrylics if you don't want to go all the way to oils, which take much longer to dry. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting how tightly this is focused, so I have to remember. Come on, Crilly, pay attention where the camera is pointed so you can actually see as I add. But like I think this area right here is a good one for adding in little drops, and as I'm taking advantage of the white gouache's ability to give me just little dabs and so forth, which is harder to do with, well, impossible to do in a way with the colored pencils. And even with watercolors, you're not getting the same effect. Certainly, I suppose there are white watercolors that you can add onto something like this, but it's I always prefer going for the white gouache, which is, as I said, very opaque, and it allows you to, you can see how this is kind of starting to pop a little, right, off of what was there underneath by the nature of it not being see-through, unlike the watercolor, which is naturally a little bit see-through. So there you go. I think that gives you the basic idea of what I'm going to be doing in time-lapse as we continue and finish this off. And then when I finish the white gouache phase, as I guess we can call this, I will be essentially done with the entire illustration, and then I can be back with a few final words. All right, well, you see how adding in a little bit of white gouache in combination with watercolor and colored pencil does a surprisingly good job of imitating oil paint. And I would encourage anyone who enjoyed this video, do one of these yourself. Not necessarily something as ambitious as this one. Just take on any sort of piece of artwork that you want to learn from. Do as careful a copy of it as you can, and you are going to learn a lot, and it's going to lift the quality of the artwork that you do in the years ahead. But for now, I want to say thank you to anyone who supported me by getting any of my books, like the Realism Challenge, or my latest book, The Two Pencil Method. And I wanted to bring out at the end this book, Manga Art. Came out a couple of years ago, but the very final illustration is, you guessed it, my little tribute to Monet. And this one was actually done digitally, believe it or not. So you can use lots of different methods for imitating oil paint. Let's go ahead, though, and lay down this brush. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be back with another one real soon.